Today I'm going to go over a really common question about age and the pros and cons of okay, like the younger 18-year-old candidate versus we've seen even as old as 36. And so I think there's pros or benefits you can say for going in younger, but there's also some real benefits going in later, 25, 26, 23, all these. And now you'll see that the rationale behind these really is trying to kind of focus on like kind of the lifestyle that you've had leading up to and all these sort of things. And so I'm going to kind of break down my thoughts and what we've seen, experiencing guys coming in we've trained of these different ages and kind of things, like I said, that things that are going for them positively and things that kind of go against them in a kind of a negative way. It's like we'll say like I kind of break in the bracket of like the younger is like 25 down to 18 years old, and thing over 25 is kind of the older category, and it's not old. Like 36 is still not old. It just creates its own sort of unique challenges for people wanting to serve at special operations level, right? So I think that the pros and cons, and like oftentimes as we get older, there seems to be the sentiment of a couple things, like some social, like I'm making up for lost time, and also, well, physically, I need to play catch up. And so I think that that's kind of the common theme for some of the older candidates or the older people trying to think, oh my God, I'm losing out, I've lost time, and I'm trying to make up for that. And that's the other side is, like I said, like that sort of midlife crisis, like life is passing me by and I got to go do something worthwhile. But that's kind of a whole other sort of conversation that I'm not really going to unpack in this list here. And this list for me, these are my thoughts that I put down. It's again not in any real particular order, but like I said, these are some of the real common themes that we see. Okay. When it comes to an older candidate, like what we're really trying to do is you lose the ability to cut corners. And what I mean is, and it's not because you're getting too old, it's because as a person gets older, they might start approaching the waiver age. Like, so each branch of service has an age in which if you want to go into service, like at 32 as a Navy SEAL, you need to get waivers. Because I think currently they're letting candidates up to age of 30. So like, it's not that a 30-year-old biologically has a disadvantage, but as I'll get to earlier, there's some advantages of being younger, so you can make some mistakes. But as an older one, cutting corners, they can't afford to do that. So you typically, as an older candidate, if you're going to do it, get a really good plan in order. It doesn't have to be a perfect plan, but your timeline is limited. And within that timeline, you have to maximize your effort. You have to make sure you have your rest periods. Your diet's got to be on point, all these sort of things, because you have less time room to make mistakes. And that's kind of typically the biggest issue with older candidates, is that, like I said, the lack of time to get prepared, not I'm too old. Okay, but there's some things that we're going to sprinkle in there about, not all 35-year-olds or 25-year-olds are created equally. And there's a lot of like life stuff that goes into that. Okay. Now, being older does and can come with some advantages. And these, again, there's a lot of variables to this, but generally speaking, an older person socially has more life experiences. They've learned how to access more information, more knowledge, more mentorship. There tends to be some older people tend to be less shy and reserved and asking for help and things like that. So and believe it or not, that's a big advantage, because in this line of work, asking for help is a really good resource. But if you're too timid and too unsure, or you're asking for help, like, hey bro, can I have some help? Like as a kid, or instead of saying professionally, coach, I'm really looking to improve in these aspects, whatever. Just it's the way that people articulate and talk, younger versus older, and that comes across as very professional. And when it comes to mentorship, that's really valuable. Okay, and I think that the thing too is, as an older candidate, an older athlete, there typically is a better understanding of how their body has developed, right? Like say a 28-year-old, a 25-year-old that's been active, like they know how their body has progressed and probably where some of their shortcomings have come. An 18-year-old, now granted, a lot of the 18-year-olds now are very sedentary, but someone that's 18-year-old is still a developing body. And so they're really not, they haven't really grown into their effort yet. They haven't been able, their body is still oftentimes maturing in the brain, it's maturing in the bones. And it's like, I want to get bigger, faster, stronger from a biological standpoint. And their effort is there, but biologically, the brain is diverting resources to continuing to develop the brain and bone and tendon and ligament, and not just right focused on getting performance enhanced. And that can be a juggle for a younger candidate, whereas an older athlete isn't like getting taller at age 26. And if you're not getting taller at age 26 and the feet still aren't growing, you've grown into a body that you know how to work with and work through. And so that's a big advantage for an older athlete of, you know, like you want to be a Navy SEAL at 16, and by 18 you have an entirely different body type, and by 23 you should have a different body type as well, because you've matured. And once that maturation comes to a close, somewhere around 25, 26 years old, then it's like you know what tires you got and know what chassis you have, right? You're just really working on performance at that point, not necessarily developing a certain body type that you're still unsure what you're going to grow into. Like I said, you're not working off the developing brain or body. An older candidate typically has a better understanding where their financial resources are, how to divert them, how to appropriate their time. Most older candidates have a better time management, right? And you know, there's a real typically an older athlete has a much understanding of value, and so they don't squander their time because they don't think it's infinite. And that's a huge advantage emotionally that an older candidate would have, is because they know, like I said, they can't cut corners. And so their effort within their given timeline tends to be a lot more focused. And that is a much more advantageous position to be in, rather than a very laissez-faire position where like, I can try this 5 or 6 times and, you know, and not really worry about it or stay focused because I'm young and I'm going to live forever. And that typically is not the thought process of someone that's 25 and 26 going into special operations. Now, there's a lot of variables that go into this, right? Because the biggest consideration we have with young or old, especially the old candidate, is like, what have you been doing the last couple of years? You know, like what did you do? What have you been doing since high school graduation? Potentially, what have you been doing since college graduation? Was that timeline of high school and college, were you disciplined? Were you focused? Were you a slip knot? Were you all of a sudden you graduate college and you see all your friends go off and go in these careers and you're still kind of wandering around, what the heck am I doing? You know, and you take a job at Lowe's, or you maybe work in an IT, or you're trying to get into Wall Street and you're all over the place. And I'm saying these things because this is very common. We have people that go from job to job to job and like they're uncertain of their lives. We've had guys that have worked in we've had PhDs. We've had 2 PhDs come through that have been working in IT, unhappy with their life, and one was 32 years old. And you're like, and so you got to unpack these things of what you've been doing with your life. And like I said, also, we've had a few people come from Wall Street, so disenfranchised with that life and job. Money, they made a ton of money, but they're not happy and they want to do something in their life to change it. And so a lot of these emotional things are compelling. But then we say, okay, well, you've been working in Wall Street or IT for the last 6 or 8 years. You've been sitting in a cubicle, staring at a screen, being inactive, and you've completely detrained, or in some cases, like we've had someone with a master's degree from MIT that as a child never played sports, never did anything, and they all of a sudden want to be this tier 1 operator or special operator, and they can't understand why their body isn't handling all the running and swimming, and they keep breaking and keep getting hurt, and they're so intelligent, but they didn't realize that they missed these entire growth and developmental stages as a kid and as a teenager. And then at 33, 32 years old, they start to run, do calisthenics, and everything hurts. Everything gets stressed out. Shin splints are impossible to get through, right? They never sorted out their diet because their entire diet has been based on of dieting. Like they were never physically active and they never learned how to fuel physical activity. And so when it's like you're doing all this physical activity, you can't be eating salads and things like that and thinking that you're going to grow, because if you're working IT all the time, and this person, their conscious was like, well, I can't eat all these high calorie foods because I'll gain all this weight. Well, now they're going off doing running, rucking, and swimming, and they're still eating like they were in a cubicle, and they can't heal from it. So there's all these little social dynamics that have got to learn as an older athlete or an older candidate. That's what I'm saying. These mistakes or these problems they've never even had to deal with. And so all of a sudden they're under a timeline with all these physical ailments, and they've never had to work through them. And so that can become very much a detriment for an older candidate as well. Now, there are advantages as well. Again, just like there's disadvantages of being young, but some of the advantages of being a young athlete or young candidate is sometimes, but not so much today in this world of America. I was going to say, like, there's less timeline for sedentary life. But again, your average 18-year-old or 19-year-old is very sedentary. They spend a ton of time on electronic platforms, a ton of time seated, and a ton of time being inactive. So now, let's say that that's not the case, because like if that person, 18 years old is sedentary, by 25, they're extremely sedentary. But there is less time that affects you at 18 of having a sedentary life typically, because even that at 18, this is the thing, and we're going to get to this too. Your body, we always say, oh, you're young and you recover fast, you can burn all those calories. Well, that's not always true. But in most cases, still, like from my experience, the 18-year-olds we get, if anything, they're just still working on a developmental body, but then they've had less time of being sedentary. And so that's an advantage in some part for a younger candidate. Now, younger candidates too, the advantage is typically, yes, they're coming from home, living with their parents. Seems to be this natural life shift. I'm going to join the military and move away from my family, but it's pretty dramatic, right? In one way. Now, the older candidate too might have been working a job that they got out of college and it pays the bills and it's got security. And now they're like, well, I'm going to join the military, quit my job, and go down this road that is really a big life shift. Both ways are a bit of a life shift. But your 18 and 19-year-olds tend to not be so distracted by that dramatic life shift, whereas someone that's like I said, you finish a college degree, you get into the workforce, you're paying bills, and you have this lifestyle that you've been afforded because of your job, but there's commitments, and then you're oftentimes going to quit a job and take a huge pay cut and join the military initially. And that is a lot. That realization for people, especially, like I said, we've had people with PhDs that have been working six-figure jobs, and now they're going to shift into the military and make $35,000 a year the first year. And the life of that six-figure job, they've got a car, they've got these things that when you shift down to taking a huge pay cut of $60,000 or $70,000 for that first year, a couple years, you're like, they can't wrap their head around of how am I going to live off $35,000. Right? And that's a huge life shift for some. But for the young person, a lot of guys, like $35,000 or $40,000 for an 18-year-old kid, that's a lot of money, right? And that seems like a natural thing for them, to do. So that's a kind of you got to weigh that as well a little bit, or think about that. And I think with a younger athlete too, is because you're not working towards that waiver age of 30, 35, whatever it might be in the reserves, is you do have some time, not to be, laissez-faire, but you can make some training mistakes. You can make a few more mistakes to make some more positive training corrections, and not really have that urgency of, oh my God, I've got to be in the Navy or in the Army in 18 months, or I'm going to have to get a waiver. It's like, hey, at 18, 19, 20 years old, you got 6-7 years to like work through. Now, we don't suggest that you work on this goal for 6 or 7 years, but my point is that it relieves that pressure valve, that, oh my God, that urgency of I've got to hurry up and perform, and there's a lot, like I said, there's context to an older, like, I haven't been training and what am I going to do? All these questions of, and again, if you're 18-year-old and you've played a lot of sports and you've been physically active, that transition to the military is very much more mental and emotional than it will be physical. And so that's I think that's an advantage there, goes to the younger candidate. And again, just to kind of recap some things, the older candidate for say is I look at it as like, what is the mileage you put on your body, you know, in the timeline from 18 to 25 and older? Like, what was that look like? What did that look like? Like I said, did you play sports? Were you physically active? Were you sedentary? Was it mileage, bad mileage, good mileage? Or were you spending that time? Like, it's not uncommon that people will still, like, they have the Navy SEAL thing in their head young. They go to college. It's kind of in their head. They go in the workforce. It's not that it hasn't been in their head, but some of the training practices that they had when they're young, they keep going to the gym. They keep staying healthy. They get a gym membership. They go to CrossFit, whatever it is. And like, you're 23 years old. You've been in the workforce, but you've still been working out, running, and staying very healthy. That individual has a very easy transition into our military because the mileage that we say that puts on their body has still been working towards like maturity and movement competence because they've still been training, maybe not intensely, but regular training for somebody is extremely valuable towards health and wellness and staying in a place where if a person does make a decision to make this life shift into something that's a lot more intense, it's way easier to like I said, to make the analogy, it's like if you're your car at 15 miles an hour and you got to get it to 100, that's a big gap. But if you've always been running your car up to 30, 50, 60, 70 miles up, right, it's much easier to go from 60 miles to 100 miles an hour. So that life shift is much easier to transition if you've stayed active, which regardless of what you're going to do, I think staying active physically is always a benefit, even especially for health, okay? You know, I think the big common thing I hear all the time is, you know, and it's like older people always say, like, I say older, like it's all ranges. Like I run into people still to this day that look at me and go, wait until you're so-and-so age. I'm like, well, I'm already 46. Like, no, you're not. Like, I have younger people that I run into that look older than me that have said to me, well, wait until you get in your 40s, right? I'm in my 40s. And so this idea that older is something that you're going to have to just accept this natural degradation is lunacy, right? I'm not talking, you know, it's going to be extremely difficult for a 60-year-old to do it, but there are some 60-year-olds out there that are extraordinarily fit, extraordinarily healthy, and can accomplish a tremendous amount. But again, we're talking at the age window of like 18 to 30. That is not old. That is the prime of your life. And if you're 30, 35 years old and you feel like your prime has passed you on, well then, like, honestly, like, special operations was never for you anyway, right? And so we got to stop listening to the talking heads that 30 years old is 30 years old is old. It's not, okay? Because I think that the people that say that younger people always recover faster, those are the old farts. Or the people, whoever I say old, they never took a priority in self-care. They never focused on high quality sleep, diet, and training because the reality is if you look at professional athletics, the best athletes in the world are like 25 to 35 years old. So 35-year-olds are not old. They're still performing and setting world records in multiple disciplines around the planet, you know, in all countries. So you don't really understand how long you can stay in this window of performance and how longevity is a real thing for athletes. And that's the name of the game, is how long can I stay at the top of the game? Because at the command, guys aren't 18 years old. Guys aren't, the average age is, I would guess the average age there is probably 28 to 30, right? So if 30 is over the hill, why are the best operators in the world in their 30s? They're late 20s and mid 30s. That's the point, right? Just a lot of people they just live a sedentary life and don't get to experience what high performance is for 15 years. But it's very, very doable, okay? Because I think that, you know, the lack of care a person practices from 18 to the waiver age, like I said, it's not conducive for selection, right? And that's the typical lifestyle. But the issue isn't merely you're just too old. It's just that a lot of people haven't practiced the lifestyle. And that's, again, to recap, is like old or young, the name of the game is that you get into the communities and you stay into the communities for potentially 20 or 30 years, right? Like legitimately, there are operators that have been operating at a high level for 20 years. And let's say that they came in at 18. right? Now we're looking at 38 to 40 years old, still doing high risk, high volume training on a regular, almost daily basis. And so again, the idea is you're not too old if you haven't, you're not too old if you've taken stock in your health. You're not too old if you learn how to offset and mitigate some of the stressors that come with the job. You can't eliminate them, right? And you don't want to, because that high stress, high urgency of the job is what allows us and keeps us sharp. We want that. We don't want to remove that stress. We don't want to remove that fear. What we want to do is take our physical body, train it to a point to where then it becomes, yes, it becomes a physical attainment that we can maintain. And then when we get to that physical age and prime, then we can be able to start really sharpening that mind and sharpen our emotional state. And that is when you're getting world-class athletes, world-class operators. So, I just want to lay this out. If it were me, the perfect athlete is going to basically go to school, go to high school, graduate, go to college, graduate, and then they're going to go in the military. Now, is college the end all be all? College for me was more like, yes, you're going to gather information, learn how to do some things, meet some great people. But that physical and emotional maturation that happens in that age window of 18 to 22 or 23, that right there gets that wheel really turning physically, emotionally, and mentally into the space where you eliminate a lot of the white noise. You've been away from home, you've experienced heartbreak, you've had struggles, you've maybe held a job, or at least you've held down consistency going to school, you've worked with professors, teachers, coaches, you've been out and around the world a little bit, maybe not traveled a ton, but you're ready to go into the extreme parochial nature of our military, especially special operations. So I think the advantage is, if the perfect soldier was going to go in, they would have stayed fit, stayed healthy, kept moving, going at age 22 to 24 years old. And that age demographic, when properly prepared, and has a very, very high success rate. So, because the reality is when I graduated BUDS at 23 years old, the 18-year-old version of me could not keep up with the 23-year-old me. No way. Not emotionally, not physically, not mentally, and certainly not with toughness. So no 18-year-old has an advantage over their 23 or 24-year-old future them if they've trained hard, properly, consistently, and reliably. So take that into stock. I'm not saying that 18-year-olds can't make it through, but the percentage of that higher trained individual in their 20s has a much, much higher success rate.